Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. For a lot of us, the goal is to grow our income, which is a great goal, and maybe you even have a target figure in mind that you're aiming for. But have you ever wondered, what's the income of the top income earners? At first, what comes to mind might be those big names that grace the cover of Forbes magazine. But let's face it, that's more like the top 1% of the top 1% of the top 1%. But if you were to look at the earnings of the top 10%, that number's more achievable for your career-focused, driven worker. And for the sake of looking at these higher income earners, let's break it down and see what it takes to be in the top 10%, the top 5%, and yes, that top 1% of all income earners. A quick note about the data presented in this video, it comes from the Economic Policy Institute and is from their most recent report released as of December 2022. And it's based on individual earned wages as gathered by the Social Security Administration. So let's start with the top 10%. The average income for the top 10% is over $167,000 a year. So even to get into these uppermost brackets, you need a six-figure income. And a lot of people have the notion that if you could just earn a six-figure income, that could solve a lot of your money problems. But consider that 51% of six-figure earners report living paycheck to paycheck. And it just might show that $100,000 plus per year income doesn't automatically solve all your money problems. And it's worth considering that there's a big difference in incomes for those at the lower end of that top 10% bracket and those at the higher end of that same bracket. But luckily for us, they broke it down into two separate categories. The average income for those in the 90th to 95th percentile is almost $130,000 a year. And the average income for the 95th to the 99th percentile is $215,000 a year. Just within this same bracket, there's almost a 70% increase going from the bottom average to the top average. And as we advance through these percentiles, the changes in income only get more dramatic. And if you're wondering what careers can get you into this bracket as an individual income earner, well, according to US News, the highest paying careers can be found predominantly in the medical field, but it also includes pilots, management, and technology. Next, we have the top 5%, and the average income for the top 5% is over $335,000 a year. And that's a big leap from the average for the top 10%. And if you're wondering what careers get you into that $300,000 a year plus salary range, well, according to Indeed, again, it's dominated by the medical field as well as C-suite executives. So if you're interested in charting a course to an income that gets you into the top 5%, perhaps these are careers worth exploring. Now, it's worth mentioning that you can absolutely work towards becoming a higher income earner, maybe working into that top 10%, or dare I say even into that top 5%, although that is a very lofty goal, without going these more traditional routes. There are absolutely people who do. There are people who are disciplined and creative enough to find a way to become top income earners in their field without going the traditional routes. So I just don't want to pigeonhole and say these are the only routes that get you there. I always liked what legendary motivational speaker Jim Rohn said: your income is directly related to your philosophy, not the economy. And if you've ever listened to any of his lectures or read any of his materials, he expands on this, saying that your income is primarily determined by the number of people you impact and the value you bring to the marketplace. So if you can find a way to bring more value to the marketplace or impact more people, you can boost your income. We could use a professional athlete as an example. They bring a lot of value, often in the form of entertainment, to a lot of people. And that's why they're paid such high wages. What they do impacts a lot of people. And finally, that brings us to the top 1%. The average income for the top 1% is $819,000 a year. Consider that the average worker earns anywhere from $1 to $3 million over the course of their entire working career. And this can help to paint the picture as to why the figures from the top 1% are so astounding. And if we break it down further and look at the lower portion of the top 1% and then the top 1% of the top 1%, the income disparity looks even more stark. The average income for the 99th to the 99.9th percentile is $542,000 a year. And the average income for the 99.9 to the 100th percentile is $3.3 million a year. It just goes to show that when you break down incomes by percentile, they really do go up in an exponential fashion. And to get into the top 1% or the top 1% of the top 1% is an extraordinary feat. And I feel like at this point in life, there's really nothing that's off limits in terms of affordability. For instance, let's consider a vehicle. The typical vehicle sold in America costs over $48,000. If you're making the average income of the top 1%, that represents just 6% of your pay. You would make more in a month than this. But now let's consider the average income for a typical American worker. The average income for the lower 90% of individuals comes in under $37,000 a year. Suddenly, that $48,000 car represents 131% of their annual pay. This individual would have to work for 16 months just to earn that amount. And that ignores all other financial realities like day-to-day living expenses and taxes, which is pretty unrealistic. Your average 1%er buying this vehicle is basically like your typical American worker spending $2,000. It's an entirely different world. And if you want to have a conversation about how likely it is that your typical 1%er is buying the typical American vehicle, that's a whole different conversation. Putting it all together, we have the average wages of the first 90%, the top 10%, the top 5%, and the top 1%. If I'm being honest, I'm not a huge fan of having the data presented in this manner. It just seems so skewed to present the 90% as one lump sum. I wish it were broken down further into 10 or 20% tiers the whole way through. I feel like that would give more value to this data, but nonetheless, this is the data we've been given to work with. It's also worth considering that over the years, it is the highest income earners who've experienced the greatest income growth. Over just the past 2 years, the lower 90% has actually experienced a loss in wages of negative 0.2%. The top 10%, their wages have grown by 1.7%. The top 5%, their wages have grown by almost 9%. And finally, the top 1%, their wages have grown by over 16%. And during this time, we've been experiencing noticeably high inflation. So with wages for all groups except the top 5% and the top 1% lagging pretty far behind inflation, that can help to explain why inflation has had such a big impact. Now, I'm a huge advocate for working to grow your income. I think a lot of us who have an interest in this personal financial space have some fairly lofty financial goals, and achieving those goals gets easier when you have a larger income, when you're working with a bigger shovel, so to speak. It's just easier to save and invest a larger percentage of your income when you have a larger income to work with, so long as you've developed good financial habits of living within or below your means. Because there's really no limit to what you can earn, but there are definitely limits to the ways you can reduce your spending or make budget cuts. You're always going to have some level of expenses, but when it comes to wage growth, there's no cap. With that being said, income is important. Yes, absolutely. But income isn't everything. It's not what you make, but what you keep that really matters. And it is possible to overspend at any income level. That's why it's so important, no matter what your income is, to develop good financial habits. And so long as you're saving and investing a portion of your income, putting your money to work, making money, you can absolutely grow your nest egg to an impressive sum over the course of an entire working career. Because it's very likely that your income will grow over the course of your lifetime and over the course of your working career. And it is far easier to start out with good financial habits in place rather than having to course correct later or having to dig yourself out of a financial mess at a later date. So what do you think about the top income earners? Do you have a target income that you're aiming for? Share your thoughts in a comment down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye.